Our moderator today is Dallas Gislason, COO of Coast, and also the Director of Economic Development for South Island Prosperity Partnership. He's been developing and leading award-winning regional economic ecosystem strategies for most of his career. Dallas co-chaired the Ocean and Marine Subcommittee during the pandemic recovery process that recommended the creation of a Pacific Canada-based ocean innovation hub and cluster that has now evolved into Coast. Welcome, Dallas.
All right, thanks so much, Ben, for the intro. I'm going to, before we get started, I want to ground us in territorial acknowledgement, just acknowledging that I'm calling in to the webinar today from the Lekwungen territory, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And we're referring to the BC oceanspace, which is primarily Coast Salish, but we also do some work on the Chalmette territories as well. So I'm going to start off by introducing COAST. For those of you who are less familiar, COAST stands for the Center of Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies. Our job is to bring together people, ideas, businesses, communities all across West Coast to create an innovation hub and cluster focused on opportunities within the global blue economy. COAST is in its early stages, but we've been able to build some fabulous, incredible momentum over the last year and a bit, working with early stage innovation startups, as well as established companies. We have some exciting announcements coming up here in 2023 that will move us closer to realizing this vision for a truly world-class ocean innovation cluster across Pacific Canada. So we're here today at the Coast Talks, which is a virtual speaker series. We launched Coast Talks to showcase many of the scientists, innovations, companies, people working hard to build a sustainable ocean future. And we're excited to have you join this conversation today. And speaking of opportunities and growth in the blue economy, paramount to bringing this all to reality are, of course, entrepreneurs. And that's the topic for today's talk. As entrepreneurs try to disrupt traditional approaches and markets, they face many hurdles along the way. And we're honored to be joined by two key people here in British Columbia who spend day in and day out helping entrepreneurs knock down these hurdles. Shannon Bard, who is the EIR for the Coast Venture Acceleration Program and the lead climate venture studio at the University of British Columbia, and Rob Bennett, who is the COO and program director at Viatech. Welcome to you both. And our third guest is one of the entrepreneurs that we're talking about, who's bootstrapping and knocking down hurdles along the path to establishing what I think is quite a fascinating technology company called Seahawk Robotics. His name is Derek Puzioli, and he is the CEO of Seahawk Robotics. Thank you to the three of you for joining us today, and let's get started.
So my training is as an oceanographer and also as a marine biologist. And as a teenager growing up in BC, I founded a long-term marine monitoring program to try to understand the impacts of industrial and human activity on the ocean environment, and then take that information and package it in a way that decision makers and communities and governments could use science to have science-based decision-making for natural resources. I was a professor of environmental science at Dalhousie University, and then we relocated back to home where I'd been doing my fieldwork for many, many decades, back to BC. And when University of British Columbia declared a climate emergency, they asked me to come and help the university address that. And to do that, we developed the Climate Venture Studio at Entrepreneurship at UBC, and it really focuses on decreasing the amount of time it takes from inventing a new technology around climate solutions and ocean technology and sustainability, and actually getting it adopted in society. So our goal is to decrease the average timeline from 30 years down to 5 or 10. And I also support some clean tech teams through our partnership that we have between UBC and Foresight Clean Tech Acceleration. And being an oceanographer, it's really, I love to be able to support other blue tech companies as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. All right, Rob, over to you. Same question. Tell us about your background and also as an entrepreneur, before your role that probably most people know you as a well-known, respected leader in Victoria's tech community with Viatech.
Thanks, Dallas. Boy, that's a tough act to follow, Shannon. So yeah, I've been in Victoria since 1977, and sort of a serial entrepreneur. I had a few companies myself, one of which was particularly successful. It's currently called CityView. It's part of the Constellation software universe. And so it's nice to see it just turned 40 years old this year. So that's pretty amazing. I've been coaching. Coaching's always been my style, my leadership style when I had my companies, but it's become really important in terms of helping, especially first-time entrepreneurs out understand what some of the rules of the game are. And so back in 2011, we built the Venture Acceleration Program along with Accelerate Okanagan in Kelowna, and with the help of the provincial government. And we launched it in 2012, and so we've been offering it ever since. And so there's now something like 11 or 12 different delivery partners in the Venture Acceleration Program. We're looking at making some major changes. And with initiatives like this, the Venture Acceleration Program is the perfect vehicle to support that sort of entrepreneurial growth. It's interesting just to note that the reason I'm here in Victoria is because of my dad, who's an oceanographer, who was the senior research scientist for Petro-Canada, was located at Pat Bay Ocean Sciences. And so oceanography definitely plays a huge part in my journey, though I don't know that much about water.
Well, I'm from Saskatchewan, so I know about lakes, but maybe not oceans. So we're in the and someone who does know about oceans, I know for a fact, is Derek from Seahawk Robotics. So for those listening, I was going to say they could Google Seahawk Robotics just to get an idea of how cool and fascinating this technology working. But you actually have a background that sort of people can see there on the screen just to see what we're actually talking about when we say a robot. It actually truly is a robot. So Derek, tell us about Seahawk and maybe a little bit about why you decided to start the company.
Well, just in the format as everyone else has gone with here, just a little bit about me. My background is in mechanical engineering, but I've been a designer all of my life. I've always gravitated toward creative endeavors like this. I started my early career out in the automotive industry in the East. I'm from Ontario originally. Spent a couple of years in that, and in around 2007 I moved to Vancouver, decided to focus more on working on design again, and kind of stumbled into the subsea engineering space back then. So I've been in it ever since, one way or another, between actually subsea engineering and also rides and attractions. So I like to say I've done everything from roller coasters to submarines, and now flying and submerging drones, which is, what you can see behind me. So Seahawk started out actually as a side project within a company that me and a few partners were managing at the time, which was it was called Igloo Innovations. And it was a boutique product design company, and we had these ideas of putting out our own products very early in the game, back in 2013 with some of my previous colleagues. But trying to be of two minds in one business that way was very, very difficult. And as that business evolved, it needed to diversify. And in early 2022, that company was merged into Hedgehog Technologies, which is a local service contractor or consulting engineering company, who I also work with during the day, and that's something we'll touch on a little bit later. But Seahawk itself came out of just an idea. What if we could make an ROV fly? And we came up with this. And in a little bit, I'll probably change my background and show you where we are now. But the mission of Seahawk is to maximize access to ocean data using unique sensor deployment methods like UAVs, as well as other types of technologies that we're currently working on right now. So that's pretty much Seahawk in a nutshell, and me, and I'm really happy to be here. So thanks for the invite, and I hope everyone enjoys this.
Yeah, thanks to all three of you for joining today. And I'm just going to give a quick instruction to those who are chiming in or tuning in. You can actually ask questions for any of our panelists or all three panelists if you choose, using the Q&A function on Zoom webinar. And so feel free to just put stuff in there as we get going here, and I'll turn my attention to those in a bit. But I'm going to start off asking our esteemed guests some questions. I'm going to start actually going back to you, Derek, because you know, today's topic is really about the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial journey and sort of the hurdles and how entrepreneurs obviously overcome those hurdles and things like that. So I'm going to turn it with you just to start, and wonder if you maybe can elaborate on just some of the hurdles that entrepreneurs face to start us off with, and maybe more specifically how some of those challenges might be unique to the ocean tech space and the environment, the ocean environment in general.
Oh, that's a big one. It's a good thing I've thought about this and think about it day in and day out. I would have to say that quite generally, the hurdles for any entrepreneur, no matter what path you're on, whether it's bootstrapping like we've been for the past few years, or whether you have investors, it's all about time, resources, and focus. And by that latter one, by focus, I don't necessarily mean focusing on your work and getting your tasks done. I mean choosing a goal, focusing on it, and riding it out until the end to see what you find out on the other side. That's a lot of the story of Seahawk. Again, behind us is an image of a drone that can land on the water and submerge itself. Very impressive, interesting technology, but that focus led us to where we are now, where we're actually producing deployment equipment that is modular, that can fit on a variety of different vehicles. So by focusing and meeting a goal, you can kind of find your way. It's a little bit of bumbling, but you know, my best advice is just to focus. So.
Right on. No, and we're going to talk more about this talk. We'll elaborate on some of these things as we get going here. You know, because it's safe to say that starting any company is difficult, technology companies, and I guess especially when you're with what you're doing, Derek, which would be combining hardware and software and getting the controls to work. And we'll hear as we talk about some of these acronyms like ROV and AUV and AUV, two different things. So it's going to be an interesting talk. So a question for Rob. So you've worked with, I'm going to say, hundreds of these types of early stage companies through the Viatech Venture Acceleration Program and other programs as well. But maybe give us some insights on why programs like the Venture Acceleration Program, why do these programs work? How do they help startups and entrepreneurs get over some of these hurdles that Derek is alluding to?
So they primarily attract people that are an entrepreneur for the first time, right? So they've had an idea. They're usually either technically oriented, or they've got strong domain expertise. They've been in the industry for 10 years. But they're not sure about what it takes to build a company. And there are, 1,001 decisions. It's probably more like 10,001 decisions that you got to make. Some are important, some aren't. How do you differentiate? If you've got, one decision to make and 5 different paths, which one is the best path to take? And it's a very lonely role, even with co-founders. The one who is deemed the main founder, the CEO, there's a weight associated with that about making the right decision. So there's different levels of support you get in these programs. So first of all, there's education, right? And so that can help answer some questions. It helps explain some of the terms, because we all love our jargon. Then the next level of support is with their coach. Right, they get someone like a Shannon who knowledgeable, experienced, and can help explain some things in lay terms, can provide moral support, and introduce people to their network, that sort of thing. And then the last thing that when we do our exit interviews, when people finish the program, is always called out is the peer support. It's both the accountability, but also this knowledge that I'm not crazy. You know, sometimes I feel like I am, but it's just a crazy journey. And so I think those are the main reasons. I mean, there's a lot of other sort of tactical, you know, strategic sorts of things, but I think those are the basic reasons about why these programs are important.
Right on. Yeah, thank you so much. So EIR, which I thought stood for Entrepreneur in Residence, but in fact stands for Executive in Residence. Shannon, so over to you. So you're the EIR for this collaborative VAP program that we've launched with Coast and Viatech, which we're calling the Coast Venture Acceleration Program. You've worked with many companies around the province. Tell us about your approach to this from the angle of clean tech or some of these emerging techs or technologies that might face these sort of, you know, tech readiness, or, you know, is the market even ready, or is the market ready for this sort of questions? What's your approach to working with the
absolutely. So most of the ventures that I work with I'm working with founders who are inventors and engineers and scientists, and very, very tech heavy, similar to what we've been discussing here. So one of the biggest challenges is that we're working within the framework of a capitalist system. So you have to look at it as a game. What's often challenging is that many of our founders may be coming out of the university system, which is a very anti-capitalist environment. And so in order to be successful in getting adoption, because our goal here is to make impact. And if you can make impact with your research or your invention through venture building and commercialization, you need to find somebody who will purchase it. And it's not always clear who your customer is. It can be very, very complex. If you're in shipping, for example, is it the person who owns the boat? Is it the person who operates the boat? Is it actually the company that's providing the funding for the loan for it? It's very, very complex. So trying to figure out who's actually paying for it, who's the customer that has a problem that nobody else can solve better than you is critical. But then who are the influencers who will actually help you win that sale? And again, it's to get adoption to make impact. Now, one of the biggest problems is that many of the solutions, many of the teams that I work with, their solution or their new venture is really solving a problem that's going to decrease energy, it's going to decrease carbon emissions, it's going to make things more efficient. There's often social benefits for it as well, around human rights, if it's around fishing, increased health and safety. All of these pieces are critically important to society. But in general, nobody does anything for the environment unless the government makes you do it. So there's a huge role to play on the part of the regulatory environment. And so in some cases, it can be very straightforward where there's been a change in the regulations, and that has actually opened the door to create a brand new market. And that then becomes relatively straightforward. What is more challenging is that if you've invented something new and that there's some existing regulations which are prescriptive, which means that it says, well, for this particular task or to receive this particular environmental permit, only technologies A, B, and C that were invented in the 1950s when we set these regulations are the only ones permitted to use to be able to be successful in getting your permit. So obviously that will create a system in which there's an artificial barrier because of the prescriptive nature of the regulations. So we've created pathways to have engagement and relationships with regulators to make them aware of these problems, and then we can work with them to resolve it so that we can actually, again, fast track the adoption of these kind of technologies and create markets so there aren't these kind of barriers. So I think that is one role that's really, really important is removing those barriers, but also working closely with regulators so that there can be the use of tools like carrots and sticks within the regulatory toolbox to actually create new markets. So that's something that's critically important. Thank you.
You know, that's really interesting because that actually leads into my next question. So I'm going to go back to you first, actually, Shannon, for a second. So you've been exposed to, the stuff we're talking about, the clean technologies, clean technologies as they maybe apply to the ocean space, clean shipping and things like that. So what do you think, what are you seeing are these market opportunities? You mentioned regulatory changes, but there's much more. What are the companies in BC pursuing here in terms of market opportunities? And where could we expect, what could we expect the ocean space maybe to look like over the next 5, 7, 10 years here on the West Coast?
Absolutely. So one thing we might want to look at is what are some of the features that we have in British Columbia that are special about this area? So right now, for example, we have a ruling government that has put reconciliation and climate together as being an important mandate for the province. So in BC, which is an investment vehicle, is $500 million in that. Climate justice is really wrapped into a lot of their investment decisions. So if we look at the ocean tech through that lens, where is it that we see challenges which can be turned on their head to be opportunities? For example, we have remote coastal communities where diesel is brought in, either flown in or brought in by ship, because they're not tied into infrastructure for energy. Well, if we can transform that and use tidal energy or use wave energy or energy of the ocean, that is a way that we can have sustainable energy in those communities, have ways that we can store it, and make those communities sustainable, but also work in partnership with First Nations so that you're getting capacity building, you can get companies and wealth generated in those communities, and anything that increases your ability to stay within your community, treating water, having renewable sources of energy, having sustainable access to food, will mean that will strengthen your land sovereignty. So that's sort of one exercise you can go through, is looking at where the challenges we have, but how does that become a superpower? And we have these phenomenal coastal communities which have responded at times where we've needed support, such as under emergency response circumstances when ships have gone down. It's the First Nation fishermen that are the first ones on when there's a ferry that sinks or a tourist boat that goes down. And so we can look at those opportunities as potential places where we have advantages where other parts of the world don't. Thank you.
Right on. Yeah, that makes total sense. So Derek, you mentioned in your opening comments about one of the jobs of the entrepreneur, which is to focus, right? And so as Shannon sort of spelled out to us, there's all these different opportunities, from tidal energy, clean shipping, the regulatory shifting that's occurring here and in other markets in the world. Tell us a bit about, so I mean, you've obviously gone through a journey where you've had to sort of hone in on a particular technology type, a particular market that you're going after. Talk to us about sort of what are the opportunities that you assessed, and then that led you sort of down into this area of focus that you're now in.
So for us, we had, as many new ocean tech startups get, we had a lot of interest from the standpoint of being able to deploy acoustic sensors using our technology. That's key to any ocean science. And for, once we found that focus, I think it was around 2018, 2019 with our technology, we began to, it presented us with an opportunity to kind of rejig what it was we were planning to do. And I guess in a way, it's less of a, you've got, what I was trying to describe before is you have a focus, and you get to the other side of it and you've got something to show, and then the market comes in and tells you, kind of do this, and this. And then, you go back to the drawing board, and then you come up with, now I have a drone that flies, floats on the water, and deploys payloads, because I didn't need to put the whole drone underwater to do the work that we needed to do. It excited a lot of people and got us some attention, but very much now, our path is this. And along the path of both of the submerging drone and the floating drone, what we found was the actual disconnection of the drone, or disconnection of the sensor from the drone, was our problem. And we needed an onboard deployment system, a winch, because we did not want to suspend payloads below a large drone flying through the air. It's just not efficient with the types of payloads that we want to carry. So, by focusing on what we were doing to begin with, and then moving to this other focus, we found, again, narrowed down again to see what the problem really is. So essentially, by going down this path, we've caused more problems for ourselves to solve, and we've also discovered that others have those problems. And that's where you build the business, is solving the problems of others. So I guess if that answers your question, I hope that answers your question, but that's my experience from our path.
Yeah, I know that's really, it's interesting. And I'm going to ask Rob to sort of elaborate a bit on this, because one of the jobs, I guess, of the Coast Venture Acceleration Program, or any of your VAT programs actually, is to help these entrepreneurs actually hone in on the right opportunity. And we always hear this term pivot, and I think every company I've talked to that's worked with the Viatech VAT program before, they always talk about, oh yeah, I went in with this, and then something happened, and then I came out with this other thing, and something happened that emerged there that caused that to happen. So I wonder if you can talk about sort of how the program helps these individuals and teams get to that point of pivoting, and why it's so important to go down these sort of process-oriented programs to get to that point.
Sure, I love what Derek was saying in terms of the customer focus. You know, your customers, they're not always right, but their perceptions are their perceptions. So understanding, you know, having an accurate view of their perception is super important. And you know, I'm one of these types that has a technical background myself. I've got a degree in computer science and started as the technical portion of my company. And I built the company to 23 clients. And then someone suggested that we should do a survey of our existing clients. It took me about 10 years to get to 23 clients. And I just didn't want to turn them over to anyone. I was very protective. But eventually I succumbed, and they came back a few months later with the results, and I was giddy. I felt like it was cheating. Your customers will tell you what you need to know. You just got to be open and receptive. And so a lot of what we do in these programs is get people over the hurdle of talking to customers. You don't have to tell them your secret sauce. As a matter of fact, they don't want to know your secret sauce. So you don't have to worry about intellectual property. What they're concerned about, or what they're interested in, is what is the benefit. Why would I want to change the way I'm doing something right now in favor of what you're suggesting, right? Because every technology is fundamentally asking people to change what they currently do. And people are pretty resistant to change. So helping the entrepreneurs find the language to interview customers and prospective customers, having either practice sessions and or follow-up sessions to review the results of those sorts of customer discovery and customer validation calls is an awful big part of it. And it's really because we're mining the information that's in the head of the potential customer. So it's really important you get to that point before you start spending a bunch of money building stuff. You know, do what I say, not what I did. It's way better to talk to customers, have a pretty good view of where things are going before you start putting a lot of money into building products on.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to reinforce what Rob and Derek have been saying on that side of these discovery interviews with your customers, is that really these are not sales calls. This is where you're doing exploration to understand what their problems are. In many cases, you don't even mention what you could tell them generally what we are working on. So I have a water technology team, water treatment team that I supported. And the most informative question that they had was when they went into communities where there was water scarcity, they asked people, what is your relation? Tell us about your relationship to water. And then people would start crying. And then you understood, they have to spend most of their day figuring out where are they going to get water from for every part of their life, whether they're, washing their babies or trying to run their business or, all these different aspects. And so that's the critical part is it's not an easy thing to do. There's a craft to it. And you need to be able to listen well and to be able to be flexible in changing your questions and crafting them so that you're getting them to open up and tell you what their problems are, which as Rob was saying, that may mean that you're going to change your solution slightly because that might be a better opportunity. Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask a question that's for all three of you, and this is something that we've been we've been digging into this with Coast and the mandate of building an ecosystem and a business environment to grow ocean ventures of all types. And I guess if you ask, some people will say that a major hurdle is capital. So finding the capital or the type of capital that aligns. So, Derek, I think, is bootstrap, but there's other companies that want equity, and there's other companies that want, convertible ways of not diluting equity, but still getting the capital. So let's talk about this. So what would a company do? And I know maybe we'll start with you, Rob, because a lot of the companies that go through the VAT program at some point realize that in order to scale, they do need to talk to some financial types, and walk us through some examples of how companies have gotten over this capital hurdle.
Yeah, it's tough because it depends on business model, and there's a lot of software related ventures in Victoria, and a lot of the angel investors that have had recent exits, sort of the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of them come from software. So there's a lot of familiarity with software, a lot of comfort with software ventures. And also software ventures don't require as much capital. So they end up being a lot easier decisions for angels, anything from $250,000 to $500,000. As soon as you start involving hardware, right, there's additional costs, there's additional timeframes. And so depending on the scale of that, it can be fairly difficult to find investors willing to do that, at least locally. The successful oceans companies that I'm directly aware of, because they've participated in venture acceleration program, have been all bootstrapped, and they've been able to have a compelling enough idea that they were able to sell very quickly after their first prototypes, and start generating the revenues that were required to go ahead and offset the costs of building the company. The problem with bootstrapping, I bootstrapped my first company, is it takes time, right? And so when there's an opportunity in the market, it's very difficult to fully pursue the opportunity if you don't have the capital to do it, right? Because it takes a team, you got to scale the team, it takes time to train the team and get them comfortable. And so with bootstrapping, you limit yourself to how much money you're able to generate from sales. So it's a stronger way of doing it, but a much slower way. And that's the conundrum that entrepreneurs need to face. So when do I go seeking capital? And the advice I have is, as soon as you've got some level of traction, and the customer validation work can show that. Like if you can actually show, these are the 25 interviews I conducted, and these are the results from these 25 interviews, that's proof. Conducting 25 interviews with people you don't know is actually a differentiator. Like that's the dirty little secret here, that most people aren't prepared to do that for a wide variety of reasons. So it can be as simple as comprehensive interviews, but even early subscriptions or early revenues are enough to start gaining investor interest.
Right on. Shannon, what's your take on this? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, Rob has really spoken about sort of the IT side. I'm going to talk about the more science-based ventures, which, as he said, are more challenging. You need more patient capital. And in general, there's some challenges within the Canadian ecosystem in that Canadian investors tend to be very conservative. We often hear from ventures that have a global potential that when they start to speak to global investors, the global investors are quite concerned or quite curious. Why isn't your first customer in Canada? Why isn't your first investor in Canada? Because our investors want to be reassured that somebody else has said it's good enough. So in general, what I've found with these sort of science-based ventures is that our investors, they want somebody else to have done the due diligence. And there are some ways that you can do that with government grants. So for example, usually they want to see a bunch of gold stars. The first gold star is, have you gotten your National Research Council Industry Research Assistant Program grant, your NRC IRAP grant? Oh, you have, fantastic, check mark. Have you applied for your SHRED credit from the CRA, which is a Scientific Research and Exploration tax credit? Oh, check. There's also within ocean tech, most of it will fall within the clean tech environment. Sustainable Development Technology Canada will provide seed funding. So there's certain checkpoints where if you are starting to raise capital, you could actually get 50 cents on the dollar from the federal government, from the STTC seed fund. Natural Products Canada has a seed fund, and there are other sources of funding that start to open up. So what I've tended to notice is that the investors want to see that the government has done the due diligence and done the work on their behalf, and then they're reassured, oh, okay, maybe this is a good bet. But what we do need to have within the ecosystem is a bit more courage to for us to be the first customers. And maybe that's a role that our governments can play at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels, using our tax dollars in procurement as a way to actually support our local economy and our local companies, which would directly feed into being able to attract more investment as you prove that there's demand. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that point. I was speaking with an ocean tech company recently up in Coquitlam, and they're trying to build a government service vehicle that's very, very expensive. So it's a very front-loaded cost, but ultimately once it's built, the government is then going to help them, like they're going to actually hire them to do a bunch of work. So it's just bridging that gap sometimes between the early getting it built and financed, and then the customers sometimes are sort of waiting for you in some cases. Okay, so I'm gonna get your thoughts on this, Derek. And as Derek's answering or talking about this a little bit, I'm gonna encourage the audience to add any questions, because I'm gonna go and look for some audience questions here in a moment. But first, Derek, what are your thoughts on this access to capital issue?
I gotta say, Rob and Shannon really covered it. They nailed it there pretty well for us. I would definitely second, maybe putting it in my own words a little bit. It's almost like a graduation. We've started out bootstrapping. We've gone out for non-dilutive funding in relatively small amounts. We've got a lot of help, both from funding and even just mentorship. Well, not just mentorship, funding, mentorship, and also getting the word out about us through the Ocean Startup Project. That's something that we now have kind of graduated onto, and graduated on from, and now we're taking the next step as our business matures. So it's a pathway, right? You have to start to gain trust and traction, at least again in my own bootstrapping experience, and this is the first company I've actually bootstrapped myself. Yeah, just seconding again what Rob and Shannon said. You hit the nail on the head. I don't know if you saw my head dip a couple times there. It's because I was writing notes down, because I picked up a couple of good tidbits there as well. So
well, one extra thing I wanted to add on is the opportunity to get investment from impact investors. So there's a program in BC, actually it's national now, the Spring Impact Challenge, and they have about 3 calls a year. And I think I've had 5 teams that have won over $100,000 in investment from brand new angel impact investors. So not only do teams go through the programming, but they train about 10 to a dozen brand new impact investors who would like to start investing in this space. And so the Angel for Climate competition is on right now. There's I think 15 finalists that came out of that, which is a separate program. So we're starting to see more people saying that this is an opportunity that as an investor, I can actually make impact with my investment dollars, and I can do that in my local community. So one of the features that's critically important that can be very, very helpful with these kind of accelerator programs is helping the founders to craft their value proposition and their impact statement. And depending on your audience, the flavor of how you're describing it might be something different. It might be slightly different. So there may be a real focus on water, or there may be a real focus on labor and human rights, and what is the social impact that's happening happening. And there are frameworks that you can use around the UN Sustainable Development Goals, around equity, diversity, and inclusion, ESG, that can be used, which for the right audiences, they understand those frameworks. And there are quantitative ways that you can express what impact you're making. So you can select indices and different metrics to do that. And that's what we're seeing that there's more demand for. So that's another pathway you can take. And also, you don't have to accept money from everyone. You get to pick and choose who you want to be in bed with. So I have a number of teams that have not fired investors, but they haven't accepted money from them because they didn't meet their criteria. So you want to be in the position that you're actually interviewing the investors and deciding who you want to actually have a partnership with. Thank you.
Yeah, really. Thank you for bringing that up. That's really really important, and I think applies well to the sort of the blue economy space, where in many cases you are integrating environmental, ecological sustainability and monitoring fish stocks and all these things that really align well to our need to sustain ourselves as humans. Okay, so turning to the audience, so this first question that I got here is around intellectual property. And so Rob, you mentioned part of this process is you're actually calling customers and interviewing customers. So the question is, how can an early stage entrepreneur validate something that's innovative or novel and sort of validate its usefulness while at the same time ensuring that their IP is protected as they go through the process? So maybe starting with you, Rob, and then anyone else that wants to elaborate.
So the recommendation, even when people meet with me, sometimes people say you need to sign an NDA, and I say I don't sign NDAs. I talk to way too many people, and I've built too much of a reputation over the years. I have a non-disclosure clause in my employment agreement, so I don't sign NDAs. And then they say, "Well, how am I supposed to speak to you?" And, well, don't tell me your secrets. I don't need to know. I won't even understand your secrets, right? I'm here to help you develop your company. So if you want to talk to potential customers, what you want to talk to them about is, what their pain points are, what they currently do to solve these sorts of problems. You're not going to divulge any intellectual property by talking about what the current pain points are and the current methods of solution are, right? The intellectual property is in your specific methods that you want to build or employ, integrate, whatever, to solve that problem. You don't have to share that with anybody. Of course, there's ways of trying to protect intellectual property. You can proceed down that path, though the strongest possible recommendation I have is don't worry about having a patent portfolio until you can afford to enforce it. If you can't enforce it, there's no use having it. So because you can have design drawings, things like that can show some prior use. So the big thing is, don't let that be the block to stop you from talking to potential customers. In my opinion, it's an excuse. It's a poor excuse. There's lots of things to talk about how to protect intellectual property once you're out there in the marketplace and you're actually engaging and selling and you're evolving your product and things like that. There's a different discussion to have there. But early on, when you're just trying to validate certain assumptions about your product and your market, you shouldn't have any concerns about intellectual property at all.
Awesome, thank you. Anything to elaborate on there, Derek or Shannon?
I would just hop on to those statements and say that I've made the mistakes of being too secretive before about what we have, and it just doesn't get you as far as quickly. And again, like Rob said, don't share your actual secret sauce. Nobody wants to know about that other than your competition, and you're not talking to them for funding or selling anything to them. So
I'm going to give a slightly different context around science-based ventures, often ones that are coming out of universities. So the challenge there is that there is a timing feature that they need to consider around if there's requirements to publish information so that students can graduate, and when you would be patenting and what you can patent. So if you've had a public disclosure, presented it at a conference, put it in a paper, you can't patent that. That's already been publicly disclosed. So there needs to be some early discussions in those particular circumstances around what might be patentable or not. There are some cases that you could adjust things to have some IP within the company. It doesn't always have to be patented. There are trade secrets. There are many companies that go for trade secrets. It just depends on the angle that you want to take. But know that a discussion of intellectual property is one that investors often want to have because they want some security that their investment is tied to something concrete and is not just a nice pitch that you made. So having those kinds of assets associated with the company, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a patent, but I wanted to bring out for people that there are we're quite excited because IP support was one of the areas that we had identified as being very difficult for science-based ventures to access if the university wouldn't pay for them on their behalf. And in most cases, the biggest university we have in the province is UBC. They can only pay for 200 patents a year. So you can imagine that smaller universities may even be an order of magnitude less than that. So a lot of people are getting letters of comfort saying, no, you own the IP, the university's not going to take it, but scrub up $100,000 to go forward and file your patent and then protect it, as Rob said. That's the part that can be costly. So we now have several different programs. There's the IAC, the Intellectual Asset Collective, in which you can apply for $10,000 strategy grants. There's 2 or 3 of those calls a year, and there's extra calls for female founders. There's the Elevate IP program, and some of this is coming actually out of NRC IRAP, which is a complete 180-degree turn face from the approach they've historically taken. Their historical view was if the IP is owned by the company benefits from it. The government shouldn't pay for it. They won't, of course, pay for the government filing fees and the patenting fees, but they will pay for the legal fees and other aspects of it. And the strategy that you may have for patent protection that you do at the forefront may be critically important to how you move forward. So taking advantage of those resources, and some of those programs are now going to be administered by Innovate BC and New Ventures BC, so they'll be more accessible for the community. Thank you.
All right, yeah, that's a really, really good exploration of that topic around IP and maybe thinking of it as like a moat strategy around your product and service. Okay, another question came in from David Fissel, who's probably everyone knows is a well seasoned veteran in the ocean space in British Columbia with ASL Environmental. The question is for funding of ocean startups, establishing a track record for science and tech capabilities in the first year or years is a prerequisite for growth and attracting capital. In the use of government grant programs, what are your views on partnering with a university organization as part of developing this track record? Maybe back to you, Shannon, since you're close to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the granting ecosystem has changed in the last 5 years. So the programs have sort of jumped around a little bit, but the primary funder of labor right now is MyTax. So if you want to get a graduate student or a postdoc in, you can get 50% of your salary, and that can be bridging for students and graduate students and postdocs to be able to work with a company and to be able to take advantage of the expertise of their supervisor at the university and the lab support they have at the university. So we have many teams who have funded most of their staff through MyTax fellowships. Now, the trick is if you don't have any cash, you can't come up with that 50%. And there are some larger scale industrial partnership grants that are available. Again, there's matching funds. Now, there is one program that I was involved in. It's for a very specific field, which is genomics. So Genome BC started a pilot innovation program last year. So it'll only be relevant if the work that you were doing applied to genomic type technology, of which there are applications within Ocean Tech. And myself and 3 other colleagues helped to provide some input to that program. And we wanted another number of things paid for that normally nobody else will pay for. So founder salary, meaning if you were a graduate student or postdoc and you wanted to start a company, you could actually get salary and wouldn't have to bootstrap yourself. The second one is being able to rent laboratory space. And the third one was being able to have money to pay for patenting. So all three of those were covered. So that's a very unusual program. Most of the other ones through NRC, the old CDR grants, the old Alliance grants, they all required a 50% match. And that's all often the kicker for some of these smaller companies to access it. The other opportunities is that occasionally there are Eureka grants, which are international grants between Canada and Israel, or Canada and Germany. There's sort of these partnership grants that come out now and again. And in those cases, they'll have particular circumstances and criteria around a particular theme. There's one other area that you might like to look at, which is Innovation Canada's challenges and the Ideas Grant, which is an analogous program with the Navy. And both of them are posting challenges on certain topics. And the Ideas program, often they're ones that you wouldn't accept from the national defense, but they're really around problems that we deal with around municipalities, because you need services, you need clean water, you need to have transportation. And so those challenges, I believe they pay the whole cost of the project. You don't actually have to have matching funds in those cases. And then the third category are all the super funds, like the Ocean Super Fund, the Digital Super Fund that we have here. In those cases, a startup would need to have an industrial partner that's their customer to pay the cash piece, and then the government pays approximately 35% for the project. But those are large, quite laborious grants. Thank you.
Wonderful. Derek, any thoughts from you on that? I know you probably have a perspective on sort of integrating different technologies together.
Oh yeah, I certainly do, and you know, just going back to that original question about the academic partnerships, it's been absolutely critical and vital for us to partner with academia to develop a lot of the technologies that we've been working on. We've done co-op partnerships with UBC through a special program that they had a couple of years ago during the COVID years, where they couldn't really place a ton of co-op students actually on site. So we gave experience, some work experience for the summer to up to 20 students from UBC, helping us develop some sensor technologies for our systems. And currently we have a partnership through MyTax, as Shannon mentioned, to develop some advanced autonomy technology at the Dalhousie University Intelligent Systems Lab. So, we've been taking advantage of that. And again, as Shannon said, you do have to have some budget to service the MyTax project. But we have just enough, and we're benefiting greatly from the partnership. So I think it's absolutely vital when you're doing anything science-based or new technology development.
Right on, thank you. So I'm gonna ask one more question over to you, Rob. We get the last laugh of the day. So there's a lot of pressure to make us laugh. The question for you is, so here we are, we're talking about hurdles of entrepreneurs, we're talking about programs, we're talking about grants, partnerships, all these options that are available. And I think a safe space to navigate all these options would be to enter or try to access the venture acceleration program. So maybe over to you to tell us how anyone watching or listening on podcast, how would they apply for the Coast Venture Acceleration Program, or any venture acceleration program that, there's continuous intake on these as well. But tell us a bit about how they get in, how do companies assess their chance of getting to work with Shannon and other EIRs?
It's super simple, Dallas. You simply go to the Coast website, you hit the little blue box that says apply, and you'll be asked 12 skill testing questions. You don't have to try very hard to answer them. And that gets you your application of the program. You'll be given a link to some online curriculum. And there's 5 modules you go through, teaching various startup fundamentals. If you're already familiar with the startup fundamentals, you can go directly to the exercises and complete things like business model canvas, value proposition, positioning statement, understanding target market personas, all those sorts of things. and you submit that to us. And if you need help along the way, you can book meetings with our coaches, Shannon being one of them. Now, we also have some companies that have been around for a bit. They actually know this stuff already. And there is an opportunity to skip past that online material and work directly with us. I would just ask the person to reach out to Dallas or myself or Shannon directly, and we can work directly with you on that. The point isn't to be bureaucratic or present barriers. The point is to make sure you're at the right level so you can take full advantage of the coaching available from Shannon and others. So yeah, simple. Just you apply, send me a note, send you a note, send Shannon a note, and it's really easy to get started.
And just to pile on to that real quick there, Rob, we haven't worked together before, but I can vouch for Shannon's mentorship. I've had many meetings with Shannon over the years, and I always come out better for it at the end. So definitely, if anyone watching this is interested, reach out to Shannon. Sorry, Shannon, you're probably going to be very busy now if you've got a big audience, but.
Hey, Derek, so closing comment from you, actually, I lied. Sorry, Rob. UAV, ROV, AUV, DUI, all these acronyms. What do these mean?
One of my esteemed colleagues and partners likes to call it the ocean robotics alphabet soup, where we just we're just acronyms coming out, you know. So am I answering this question, or?
Yeah, sure, tell us. ROV.
ROV is remotely operated vehicle. It's probably one of the most basic forms of ocean robots that we use today. They represent some of the first ocean robots. They're usually tethered vehicles that can deploy off of a ship. An AUV is an autonomous underwater vehicle. You know, those come in many flavors and shapes and sizes, and every week I feel like I see a new one coming out. So it's a big industry. UAVs are uncrewed aerial vehicles, which is what this is behind me. Is there more? I mean, there's a lot more, guys. We could be here for a while.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And I said DUI, that's driving under the influence. So don't drink and drive your ROV. Do it sober only, please. So over to Ben, just to close us out. Just want to thank our three esteemed guests, Derek, Shannon, Rob. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. And thank you to our audience. And visit canadacoast.ca if you want to pursue the Coast Venture Acceleration Program. And we hope to hear from you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating and attending today's Coast Talks. The panel discussion will be available on YouTube shortly, and the Coast Talks for February will be announced soon. Subscribe to our newsletter at canadacoast.ca for all the latest information on Coast. Thank you.